we still continue with the same financing lines that we had, since 2019. But we have a very, a trade finance line. So it is kind of suited for this kind of volatility. So they finance you based on what you have in stock. If your stock is worth more, then your credit line grows with that, the price of your stock.
Right.
So we've had no issues with financing thanks to that. We have a pretty big credit line for what we need at the moment. Given our equity, we have a huge facility that we don't need to use today at 100%. But it also helps us because the financing just grows. If my coffee costs, the coffee that we've been buying or that we have in stock is worth more, then we are allowed to draw down more from our credit line. So it hasn't changed. And it's actually, that was something that we started working back in 2012, 2013. We said, we need to have a credit line that is suited for our business, not a fixed, okay, here you go, let's get $2 million. If the market goes up twice, you still have 2 million, and then you can only buy 50% what you used to buy. So it was something that we were planning, and we worked really hard for between 2012 and 2019 to actually get to the level where we could find a bank that could lend us a trade facility that would grow with the business.
If you're looking for a free way to support the work we do, bringing you conversations with our amazing guests on the Daily Coffee Pro podcast by Map It Forward, please subscribe, follow, and rate us wherever you listen to the podcast. It really helps us out. It's also a huge help if you share this episode and our social media content with your coffee friends. For links, check the show notes. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 3 of a 5-part series with Alejandro from Caravela. We are talking about how is 2025 playing out for coffee so far. And in this episode, we're going to talk about pricing and we're going to talk about funding. And I'm particularly interested in this because there's a lot that I want to learn from you here, Alejandro, because I guess the first question that I have to ask is, we'll talk about pricing in a second, but from a funding perspective, how has that shifted in 2025? Like, what I'm wondering is, have the rules changed? And are the people that are funding these businesses, are they using a different mindset given that this year has been very volatile in coffee?
This from what we deal with or who we deal with? No, we still continue with the same financing lines that we had, since 2019. But we have a very, trade finance line. So it is kind of suited for this kind of volatility. So they finance you based on what you have in stock. If your stock is worth more, then your credit line grows with that, the price of your stock.
Right.
So we've had no issues with financing thanks to that. We have a pretty big credit line for what we need at the moment. Given our equity, we have a huge facility that we don't need to use today at 100%. But it also helps us because the financing just grows. If my coffee costs, the coffee that we've been buying or that we have in stock is worth more, then we are allowed to draw down more from our credit line. So it hasn't changed. And it's actually, that was something that we started working back in 2012, 2013. We said, we need to have a credit line that is suited for our business, not a fixed, okay, here you go, let's get $2 million. If the market goes up twice, you still have 2 million, and then you can only buy 50% what you used to buy. So it was something that we were planning, and we worked really hard for between 2012 and 2019 to actually get to the level where we could find a bank that could lend us a trade facility that would grow with the business.
Have you found that, let's turn instead of to your type of business, but to roasters' business, and a lot of them being financed by whatever financing situation they've got set up. Has that typically shifted given the volatility that, as far as you know, this year?
Well, the majority of the roasters that we sell to, we are their bank. So an importer
You're
is their bank.
pre-financing their orders. Yeah.
Right. So, that hasn't changed. We still
for
finance
your
them.
Customers.
Yes.
Right.
We still finance them. And I think that's the majority of importers. Our job is not just to import, move paper around and logistics. it's also to finance those customers, right? Sometimes, we finance their inventory for 6 months, right? And then give them 30-day net terms to some of them. So it's a pretty long cash cycle. Our average cash cycle is about 240 days. It's a pretty long cash cycle.
Long. Yeah.
So we finance them, and that hasn't changed. The bigger guys, they do have their own facilities that probably work very similar to ours. And then the middle guys, we probably use a combination of their own credit facilities and our financing. So I don't think that has essentially changed. It's just gotten more complicated and more expensive to finance coffee. But in that sense, I think that the market had built the systems and the structures to help roasters, finance their coffee at their expense. In the end, we charge them carry for holding the coffee.
And let's talk about price here. The volatility of the price of coffee has been out of control this year, on the high side, but still out of control and very volatile. Did you expect that?
Yes, that was expected. Every year that you see that there's too many forces, working around the market, you are kind of expecting that volatility. There have been days that have been extreme volatility, 20 cent, 25 cent days from high to low. But what you don't know, or we can expect, is when we'll see that 25 spread day. But we did expect a lot of volatility during the market, and it was not something that to be surprised. It just made a little sense with what was going on in the weather and in Brazil, with the stocks, with all these different forces that are coming into play.
The part that I'm trying to learn about this and understand it, so maybe you can help me, and please forgive me if my questions come from ignorance. The part that I don't understand is, given that the businesses that are built by roasters and cafe owners are so debt heavy and are so dependent on financing, given the volatility that we're experiencing, how does a bank look at that from, let's say, a roaster's perspective? And how do the people that finance you guys look at it? Do they turn around and say, well, this is the agreements that we have, the rules stay the same? Or in a year like 2025, when things are as crazy as they are, do people come knock on the door and say, we need to reassess this situation? I'm completely ignorant to this side of things. That's why I'm curious about this, because surely, given that the circumstances are the way that they are, and we don't have any indicators that are telling us that we're getting out of this in 10 minutes, what happens from that perspective?
I can't speak too much about roasters or cafes. I have no idea of that kind of business and how they finance themselves. I do know that they're generally highly indebted businesses. I can only imagine that what a bank does is, what a normal bank does for any other businesses. They assess the risks of your customer based on your equity and your cash flows, and depending on how your finances look, they might pull the plug completely and tell you have to repay all of it, or they might just say, "Oh, I'm just going to have to increase your interest rate because you're now a more risky customer." In our case, we get lots of there's lots of vetting, because it's of course financed by stock that we have in third-party warehouses, which actually helps. If they were our warehouses, we'd probably have a folk every day knocking on our door, "Hey, I want to see your inventory." But because they're third-party warehouses, and that's part of the coffee industry that's built into the coffee industry for a long time. That's the way that most people operate. They don't have most traders do not have their own warehouses. They use third-party warehouses because of precisely that. It allows that kind of third-party control of your inventory, and not only for you, but for the banks. So I think the industry has already, especially the finance part of the industry, is pretty well structured for the coffee industry, for the technicalities and the way the industry operates. So I don't think there have been massive changes in that regard. If anything, what's happened is that there's more oversight and there's more risk control. Like, let me go see your inventory. Let me do more compliance work around what you're showing us. And so there's a lot more of that going on. And if you look, your financials look bad, then they would say, okay, well, we need to increase that interest rate. Or if they're in really dire strait, then you need to repay the debt. That's it. So you have to liquidate your inventory and pay me back, right?
Right.
I haven't heard of anything like that happening. What we hear is that that if you didn't have this kind of line, which a trade credit facility that grows with the price of inventory, that those are the ones that are really suffering, because finding new options is going to be difficult, just because we're seeing so much volatility and the risk is higher. So I think if you didn't have the structures in place before this volatility, you probably won't be able to grow your business. You'd have to shrink your business and do less volume, because the coffee prices are much higher than they were.
Or at least weather the storm of the impact of the storm that's here, right? Like there's people who have inventory and they'll stay in business as long as they have inventory, but they don't have the mechanisms to replenish that inventory because they don't have or grow it. Right. With regards to funding, you were talking about your lines of credit, they move with the price up. What happens when the price moves down? We had a couple of moments this year when the price dramatically dropped. What happens in a situation like that?
Well, we still have inventory. What we have is going to be cheaper, so it doesn't really affect the way that the financing line works. What happens though is, with big shifts in the market, especially a big drop in the market, and if you've had futures contract and you have futures contract fixed into the future, the roaster has fixed into the future, or vice versa, depending on how the market moves, then what you probably face is with margin calls. And you do have to.
You want to tell people what that is?
Finance those margin calls. It's a way that the exchange tries to guarantee that in times of high volatility, you have some support, that you will be able to deliver the coffee to the exchange.
You can cover your position.
That's right.
Right.
So it changes. It's gone up significantly in the last year because of the high volatility and the high prices, and that if you don't have enough credit line or enough cash to finance those margin calls, then you're going to have to liquidate your position, which might put you in a very difficult position, depending on how you're positioned, if you're long or you're short, right? And depending on how the market's moving up or down. So that's probably been the biggest challenge for a lot of people, because the big drops, the big volatility highs or increases or drops in the market trigger your margin calls, depending on how you're positioned. And that could be a significant amount of money. We've had in our margin call account almost $1 million. $1 million that you have to have to do that. And we're a small trader, so imagine if you're a big trader, a big move in the market could mean millions of dollars of extra money that you have to deposit into your margin call account. You have less than 24 hours to do that. It's not like, let me find the money and I'll pay you back in 7 days. No, it's the next day has to be in your margin account. So you have to have that availability, that liquidity of money.
Wow.
And that's probably the biggest problem that most traders have had, is finding very rapidly, in less than 24 hours, the money to fill those margin call accounts.
I want to talk about pricing now, because what I think is very interesting is the conversation that's going on about the difference in pricing between commercial coffee versus specialty coffee, and which is better value this year. And what are your opinions about which is what's happening with pricing and the difference between specialty coffee and commercial coffee?
Well, there's kind of been two trends. At the beginning, a lot of roasters said, okay, so now your coffee is way more expensive. It used to be, let's say $3. Now it's $5. I can get coffee for $4 instead of $5. Yes, it's more expensive than the $3 I was paying before, but I'm not having to pay $5. So they resorted to buying lower quality because it was cheaper. As we've seen the market stay up in above $3, not everybody, but a few roasters have figured it out and said, well, you know what? the difference between specialty and commercial used to be this much in percentage-wise, and now it's shrinked. So guess what?
Right.
I'd rather buy specialty, really good coffee, because I'm paying in proportion much less than I was paying when the market was at 150. So the market was 150 and we paid 3, so that's twice. That's a premium of 100%. The market is now 350, and now I'm having to pay $5. Well, guess what? Now it's half 50%. It's less than 50% premium. So you're kind of seeing shifting views. At the beginning it was kind of the easy math, and now it's the more complex math because you now have to divide instead of just subtract, right? And so we still see the one that are just looking at cheap, and we're seeing the second one we're seeing more of the second ones that are looking, well, you know what? It's actually better to buy specialty now because the premium is much lower in percentage terms. And one thing that we're starting to hear, and I think it's just mind, right, is, hey, your coffee doesn't sound that expensive anymore. Which is really interesting.
There's a rewiring. It's so interesting. Go ahead.
It's a complete rewiring, as you said. And that is the good thing of what we're seeing. In the long term, we're rebasing what price looks like in coffee. And
there's a shift in consciousness, right?
Yes, and the longer we remain above 3, the longer that will stick into the future, and that's where I'm an optimist by definition. I like to think on the positive, not in the negative.
We've talked about this,
and so I see this as a positive thing for the industry because it's going to rewire the whole mentality of the industry. Not for everybody, of course, but at least the ones that really care and really want to do something different. For them, it's going to be a much easier proposition to charge $5 in the future than it was 2-3 years ago.
Because this is an interesting moment for those who built businesses over the last couple of decades based on the idea that coffee is cheap. And if you built a business with the expectation that coffee was always going to be cheap, now what we've got to figure out is how you're going to get this business and this relationship that you had with your customers based on cheap coffee, how you're going to grow that and shift the discussion from that to something that's viable long term. A lot of the businesses that I know that were built on cheap coffee have just decided to go out of business. Or what they're doing is they are serving a lot less coffee and a lot more signature drinks. So because their business is built on commercial coffee anyway, it's not like they can go down in quality. What they've decided to do is offer other things to keep things moving. That a friend described it as a duck swimming on a river. That everything looks fine above the surface, but underneath they're pedaling really, really quickly. So yeah, really interesting. I want to ask you I'm going to ask you in the next episode a little bit more about that, because we're going to talk about how we work together to generate value for stakeholders. And what I'm wondering about is what's going to happen with the cheaper side of the industry, and is there going to be a culling that's going to move with that? So join us in the next episode, folks, where we're going to explore the supply chain and strengthening the stakeholders. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.